month after the massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, the vice president is expected to present an array of gun control proposals this week. He has publicly mentioned universal background checks for gun buyers and restrictions on high-capacity magazines. The White House adds that the president will also push Congress for an assault weapons ban. A spokesman explained Biden did not mention the controversial ban because the panel focused on consensus proposals. It appears you can count the National Rifle Association out of that consensus. For starters, Biden talked about his conclusions before he met with the NRA. And after the Biden session, the gun rights lobby said, quote, "We were disappointed with how little this meeting had to do with keeping our children safe and how much it had to do with an agenda to attack the Second Amendment." Joining me now is NRA President David Keene. I'm very glad to see you. Thanks for coming. Let's just set the bottom line here. In that meeting, was anything said by the vice president that you could agree with in terms of a proposal, and was anything said by you that he could agree with?
Well, he'd have to speak to that. We sent Jim Baker, former director of our Institute for Legislative Action, to the meeting because he knows most of the people. He's been involved in this for a long time. And we went to the meeting on the assumption that, as the vice president and his spokespeople had said several times, that they entered this without any conclusions having reached. And of course, as you pointed out, the conclusions were reached. We suspected all he wanted to be able to do was to say he'd talked to us, and now they were going to go forward to do what they wanted to do. We made the point that there are things that can be done. One of the things that we have pushed for a number of years is including those who've been adjudicated to be mentally incompetent and potentially dangerous onto the lists of those people who are prohibited from buying firearms. That has not been done. That should be done because most of the people who engage in these sort of things are people who have had real trouble. For example, some years ago, the Virginia Tech shooter would not have been able to purchase a firearm had that been done in Virginia. We hope that the administration will get behind that kind of proposal.
It appears that they possibly are in fact doing that. But the question here is that there have been, we know that the NRA, for instance, fought in one of the states that was trying to put, to say, look, folks that are mentally ill may not have guns, and you wanted to make sure that they had a right to go back.
Correct.
And, say, hey, I'm okay now. So even though you talk about it, it seems to a lot of people that you put the brakes on things like that.
What we put the brakes on is anything that simply takes away a person's Second Amendment right for no good reason. I mean, you can restrict a constitutional right, like the right of free speech. Famously, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, if there's a very good reason and if there are safeguards. What we have suggested is that, and this has particularly come up because this administration and a previous one have attempted to bar returning veterans who sought psychological help from owning firearms. We've said, fine, if there's an adjudication that they shouldn't be doing this, but if that happens and they get better, and after all, the whole point of a mental health system is not to permanently relegate people to an inferior status, but to cure them. If they are cured, there ought to be a way out of that. That's all we've said. And we think that's very fair.
Insofar as the things that we have seen out there, universal background checks, in assault weapons ban, something that contains these clips, makes them so that you can't have those large capacity, that is just a non-starter for you.
We don't think any of those things work.
So, the art of compromise in Washington is for somebody to give something up. And for the other people to give something up. What are you willing to kind of put on the table?
You should absolutely be willing to compromise on things that accomplish the purpose. Our objection to those things is that they interfere with people's rights without doing anything to solve the problem. If you're going to solve the problem, there are two things you have to do. You have to get the root of the problem. And in virtually all of these cases, that's a mental health problem. We have a mental health system that's collapsed. And secondly, you have to provide security because you can't always find somebody who's about to do something. Now, we're not experts on mental health. And we're really not experts on security, though we've set up independently somebody who is to look into that. But we do know a little bit about guns and firearms. And we know what works and what doesn't work. And we're not willing to compromise on people's rights when there is no evidence that doing so is going to accomplish the purpose.
So that's no assault weapons ban, no ban on these multi-clips. So I don't think the White House is going to budge on their push for it. You're not going to budge on your push back. So let's talk about the politics of this. Do you think you have enough support on Capitol Hill to keep an assault weapons ban from passing?
I think right now we do. Sandy, you've been watching Capitol Hill for a long time, and when a president takes all of the power of his office, if he's willing to expend political capital, you don't want to make predictions that you don't want to bet your house on the outcome. But I would say that the likelihood is that they are not going to be able to get an assault weapons ban through this Congress.
How about a clip?
I think
some kind of restriction on clips.
I don't think ultimately they're going to get that either, because I don't think you can make a case that you can really regulate it, because these things cost virtually nothing. You and David Gregory could find one. But the fact is that we live in a society where, first of all, we have constitutional rights, and secondly, there are millions upon millions of Americans who value the rights that they have under the Second Amendment and who are involved in the shooting sports or use firearms for self-defense, and we think that they're going to be heard.
And when you look at your power, one of the things that you said when you came in was our number one political priority is to defeat the president for a second term. That didn't happen. You also lost some pretty high-profile Senate races that you invested in. What does that say about the power? Because there are a lot of people out there that say, look, this has changed, that Newtown has changed public sentiment. It's changed on Capitol Hill, and yet you think that the NRA still has the power to block this?
The NRA doesn't have the power, but those Americans who believe in the Second Amendment do. The races that were decided this year weren't decided on Second Amendment issues, as you well know. It wasn't discussed. The president claimed he would never take your rifle, he'd never take your sidearm, he wasn't going to interfere in your Second Amendment rights. In those races where there is a clear choice, and let me give you an example. We were very involved in the Wisconsin gubernatorial recall, where you had a clear supporter of the Second Amendment and a clear opponent of the Second Amendment. And in that race, we made a 6-point difference. Or I should say, gun owners made a 6-point difference. In that race, we did exit polls, and 45% of everybody that voted said they supported the goals and principles of the NRA. So I'm willing to suggest that gun owners in this country have as much influence as they always have, and perhaps more, because guns are more acceptable now than they were 10 years ago.
One of the big questions here has been, who does the NRA represent? You do take millions of dollars from people who make guns and who make bullets, all perfectly legal. I'm sure they're all fine folks.
Actually, Sandy, we get less money from the industry than we'd like to get.
Right, but you get millions of dollars from them. So the question comes up, and the criticism has been out there that the NRA and some other gun supporter groups gin up this. They're going to come take your guns away, because what happens? Those gun sales rise. And people go out and you're sort of frighten people into thinking your guns are going away, when in fact even members that are sort of friendly to you all, that have A ratings, are saying we've got to look at this assault weapons ban. And the accusation is that you are ginning up this conversation because it helps gun sales.
The two people who were selling so-called assault rifles are Senator Feinstein and President Obama, not us. They're the ones that are airing American gun owners. It isn't the NRA. But we do say, one of our core missions, the NRA has been around since 1871. And from the 1970s on, we have emerged as the defender of Second Amendment rights. That's a core part of our mission.
Sure. But is that, in that, do you support gun owners, or are you supporting gun manufacturers?
We support gun owners, our members, and the people in this country who believe in the Second Amendment. We've had our differences in the past, if you know the history of the NRA, with gun manufacturers, because that's not our constituency. Our constituency is twofold. It's the American people who want to own guns and use them legally, and it's the Second Amendment itself.
David Keene, President of the NRA, thanks for joining us.
Anytime. Thank you.